They thought I was just a number cruncher, a guy who faded into the background in rooms full of smug suits. They fired me, called me outdated in front of my whole team, like my 15 years of grinding meant nothing. But they didn't know my secret, the one my father left me, the one that made this shiny glass tower in Chicago mine. I'm Ethan Caldwell, and I own 90% of the company they just kicked me out of. Ever had a moment where time just stops? Where someone storms into your life, drops a bomb on everything you've built, and expects you to crumble? That's what Derek Vaughn did to me on a Tuesday afternoon in Chicago's Loop. He barged into my office. No knock, no respect, just arrogance and cheap cologne. He slapped a folder on my desk and barked, "Ethan, we need to talk." Now, I'm not the type to lose my cool. My father, James Caldwell, always said, "Patience is power, Ethan. Don't let emotions steer the ship." But when Derek stood there, looking at me like I was some intern who botched a report, I felt a cold wave ripple down my spine. Not anger, something sharper, more focused. I knew right then that he'd made a massive mistake, and I was going to make him pay, not by yelling, but by letting the truth do the talking. I was sitting in my small office on the 32nd floor of a high-rise in Chicago's Loop. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, glinting off my computer screen, where the numbers on a spreadsheet were telling a beautiful story. This quarter's revenue was up 12%, the best in 5 years. My team had worked tirelessly, double-checking every detail, making sure no mistakes slipped through. I smiled, thinking of my father, the man who'd built this company from a tiny warehouse in the suburbs into a tech empire worth millions of dollars. I twisted the old watch on my wrist, the last gift my father gave me before he passed. Its silver face and steady second hand ticked like a reminder of his words. "The right moment will come, Ethan. Just be patient." I brushed my thumb over the watch's glass, feeling its rhythm, and turned back to the spreadsheet. Then the door flew open. No knock, no courtesy. Derek Vaughn, the newly appointed head of operations, stormed in like he owned the building. The stench of his cheap cologne hit me, mingling with the air radiating from his tailored suit. He tossed a folder onto my desk, his voice sharp. "Ethan, we need to talk. Right now." I looked up, calmly setting my pen down. "Sure thing," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. But Derek didn't sit. He stood there, hands on hips, staring at me like I was some rookie who'd just screwed up a report. "The board's restructuring the leadership team," he announced, his tone like he was reading from a script. "We need real leaders, not guys who just crunch numbers. Frankly, Ethan, you're too outdated for where this company's headed." The word outdated echoed in my head like a gunshot. I blinked just once, letting his words sink in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying no emotion. Derek smirked, the kind of grin a guy practices in the mirror before pitching to investors. He leaned in, like he was asserting dominance. "Don't make a scene, Ethan. You're fired. Effective immediately. No performance review. No warning." My team had just delivered record-breaking revenue, outpacing our rivals in Silicon Valley, but that didn't come up. I stared at him, searching for a shred of logic in this decision, but all I saw was arrogance. "Reason?" I asked, still calm. He shrugged, like my question wasn't worth his time. "You don't have what it takes to lead, Ethan. This company needs bold, confident visionaries. You're just a number cruncher, nothing more. We need someone who can inspire, not someone who hides behind spreadsheets." I nodded, saying nothing. He wanted me to snap, to beg, to give him something he could brag about in the boardroom. But I'd learned from my father that silence can be the sharpest weapon. I stood, offering a firm handshake. "Thanks for the clarity. Good luck." Derek's eyes narrowed, like he was waiting for me to break. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. He turned and strutted out of my office, leaving behind a heavy silence. I glanced down at the watch on my wrist. The second hand ticked steadily, unyielding. I thought of my father, of the mornings he spent in that old warehouse in the Chicago suburb, checking ledgers by hand, teaching me that numbers never lie, no matter what people do. Dick could call me outdated, but he didn't know I was more than a number cruncher. I was James Caldwell's son, and this company carried his legacy, and mine. I looked around my office. The glass walls, the whiteboard, scrawled with notes, the chipped coffee mug I'd used since my first day here. It all felt familiar, like an extension of me. But now, it seemed foreign, like I no longer belonged. I started packing my things. Not much. A family photo from the opening day of my father's first office, when I was 10, grinning ear to ear beside him.
Whoa.
The coffee mug, and a stack of old notes, ideas I'd pitched in meetings, only to have Derek dismiss them with a smug smile. Outside my office, the floor buzzed with whispers. "Curious, Pitying and indifferent eyes followed me as I walked through the rows of cubicles. A few people pretended to be busy with their screens, but I knew what they were thinking. What did Ethan do wrong? Why him? I didn't stop, didn't explain. I didn't need to. When I stepped out of the building, Chicago's sunlight hit my face, warm but sharp. The wind off the Chicago River carried the scent of water. And through Ford, the loop, feeling like a 15-year weight had lifted off my shoulders. They thought my career was over. They thought I'd slink away, head bowed, accepting defeat. They were wrong. I pulled out my phone and texted Bill Harper, my family's lawyer. It's time, get everything ready. His reply came almost instantly. Got it. We can call a shareholder meeting in 5 business days. I glanced back at the gleaming glass tower, where Derek was probably gloating over his imagined victory. He didn't know that the next time I walked through those doors, I wouldn't be an employee. I'd be the guy who owned the company, 90% of the shares. Handed to me by my father on my 35th birthday, and I'd make him see that calling me outdated was the biggest mistake of his life. I brushed my thumb over the watch again, feeling its steady pulse. Patience, Ethan, my father used to say. The right moment will come. And now, that moment was here. 2 weeks before Derek Vaughn fired me like I was yesterday's trash, I got a call from Bill Harper, my family's lawyer since I was a kid. His voice was low and clipped, like he was sharing a state secret. Ethan, you need to come to my office. There's something you have to see. I drove through the loop, weaving past the bustling crowds on State Street, and pulled up to an old granite-fronted building. Bill's office was on the 5th floor, a wood-paneled space that smelled of old books and quiet power. On his desk sat a large envelope, sealed with red wax, like something from another era. Your father was very clear, Bill said, sliding the envelope toward me. You had to wait until your 35th birthday. I raised an eyebrow, half joking. What is this, Bill? A late birthday card or a treasure map? Bill smiled, the kind of smile that says he knows more than you do. James always wanted the important things to feel weighty. You'll understand when you open it. I took the envelope back to my apartment in Lincoln Park, a small but cozy place with a view of the Chicago River. I waited until the next morning, my 35th birthday. Dawn light slipped through the blinds, illuminating the coffee table where my father used to sit, reading the paper with a mug in hand, as if the world made sense in black and white print. I sat in his spot, feeling his presence, and opened the envelope with the careful precision he always used for things that mattered. Inside was a handwritten letter in his neat, deliberate script, and a stack of legal documents with a gleaming gold seal. I read the letter first. Ethan, if you're reading this, you're 35. I've watched you work twice as hard for half the credit. I've seen you stay silent in rooms that didn't deserve it. I knew what would happen after I left. This company is our legacy, but it's being tarnished by men like Derek Vaughn. I'm not giving you just a seat at the table. I'm giving you the whole damn table. Own it, son, with all the patience and integrity I taught you. My hands trembled as I read the final lines. I set the letter down, took a deep breath, and turned to the documents. It was a trust, set up 10 years ago when my father stepped down as chairman. He hadn't sold his shares like everyone assumed. He'd held on to 90% of the company, placed them in a trust in my name, set to activate on my 35th birthday. Not 51%, not 50%, 90%. With full voting rights, immediate control. I read it 4 times, afraid I was hallucinating. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner. I called Bill right away, my voice almost a whisper. Is this real? He didn't hesitate. As real as it gets. Your father made sure no one would know, not even the board, unless you told them. I sat there, stunned. All those years proving myself in boardrooms, full of smug suits, I'd been holding the keys the whole time. Why didn't he give it to me sooner? I asked. Bill's voice softened. He wanted you to see the company for yourself, Ethan. To decide if you wanted it, and to see who'd show their true colors without him around. It hit me like a punch to the chest. My father knew. He knew the company culture would rot, that guys like Derek would rise, that I'd be sidelined, undervalued. But he also knew I wouldn't quit. The next morning, I met Bill at a small coffee shop in the West Loop, the kind of place where no one wore name badges or asked what you did for a living. I said, we're calling a shareholder meeting. But don't tell the board yet, not until I say so. Bill raised an eyebrow. What's the plan, Ethan? I looked out the window, watching Chicago's morning rush like nothing had changed, and said, I'm going to walk into that boardroom and show them exactly who they tried to fire. Back to the day I was fired. I didn't answer HR's emails or the calls about an exit interview. Instead, I spent my time at that coffee shop, meeting with Bill and Maggie Thornton, the woman who'd quietly protected my father's legacy since his death. Maggie was sharp, her gray-streaked hair pulled back, a former assistant to my father who spoke with the weight of someone who'd seen it all. She didn't waste words, but when she did, each one landed like a dart. She slid a folder across the table, her voice like she was delivering military intel. I've watched Derek tear down your father's legacy piece by piece. You don't owe him a shred of courtesy. The folder was a goldmine: internal performance audits, ownership records, meeting minutes, and a corporate culture study that should have come with a warning label. Employee satisfaction was down 38%. Turnover in key departments was up 47%. HR complaints were swept under one rug after another. Maggie cut to the chase. Derek's been inflating short-term projections to cover his long-term incompetence. Keep this up, and the company's toast in 2 years. I sat there, letting the numbers sink into my bones. I didn't need to raise my voice or slam the table. The truth was loud enough. I'm not going to gloat or yell, I told Maggie. She gave a dry, knowing smile. You don't have to. Let the data do the talking. I got to work. Every night, I sat in my apartment, the glow of the Chicago River flickering outside my window, and pored over the documents. I cross-referenced financial reports, spotting unapproved expenses, first-class plane tickets, bonuses for Derek's buddies, while other departments got budget cuts. I cataloged every ignored HR complaint, every late-night email Derek sent to pressure employees. I didn't do it alone. Maggie connected me with a few loyal employees, fed up with Derek's leadership. Ryan, a guy from customer service, slipped me a USB drive with internal emails Derek thought were deleted. Laura, a product developer, shared buried reports showing Derek's pet projects crashing and burning. We met in discreet places: a dive bar in Wicker Park, a quiet corner of the Chicago Public Library. We kept our voices low, didn't draw attention. But each meeting was a piece of my plan falling into place. Bill helped me prep the legal paperwork. You're tossing a grenade into their boardroom, he said, pointing at the folder. They pulled the pin the day they fired me, I replied, not blinking. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for Tuesday. Not so soon it looked rushed, but close enough that Dick wouldn't have time to mount a defense. I wanted him to think he'd won, that I'd vanished. His smugness was his biggest blind spot. The night before the meeting was called, I sat alone in my apartment, holding my father's letter. I read it again, each word a reminder. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, its second hand moving like a heartbeat. I thought of my father, of the days he'd take me to the old office, showing me how to balance ledgers, how to read people through their numbers. Derek thinks he can erase me, I muttered, staring out at the Chicago River. He doesn't know I've been ready for this moment my whole life. I folded the letter, setting it beside the family photo on my table. Tomorrow I'd walk into that building, not as a victim. I'd be the guy with 90% of the share. And I'd make Derek see just how badly he'd underestimated me. Tuesday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Chicago's dawn shimmered on the river, its light filtering through my Lincoln Park apartment window. I stood before the mirror, adjusting the navy suit I'd bought 5 years ago for a big opportunity that never came. Today it fit like it had been waiting for this moment. I strapped on my father's watch, feeling its steady tick against my wrist. Patience, Ethan, I muttered, echoing his words. The moment's here. I picked up the folder Bill Harper and I had prepared, proof of Derek Vaughn's failures, from financial reports to buried HR complaints. Next to it was the family photo, taken on the opening day of my father's first office, me a 10-year-old kid grinning ear to ear. I brushed my thumb over the frame, feeling the weight of the legacy he'd entrusted to me. Today, I'd walk into that boardroom, not as the guy they fired, but as the man who owned 90% of the company. I drove to the Loop, cutting through traffic on Wacker Drive. The company's gleaming glass tower loomed against Chicago's skyline. I parked, took a deep breath, and stepped into the lobby. The receptionist, Sarah, looked up, her eyes widening like she'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, voice hesitant. I gave a small smile. "Morning, Sarah." She blinked, then smiled back. "Good luck, Ethan." I nodded and stepped into the elevator. Bill was waiting in the 32 ND floor hallway, near the boardroom. He wore a gray suit, his face calm but sharp. "They're in there," he said, voice low. Derek's mid-sentence, thinking this is a strategy session. I adjusted my jacket, nodded. Not for long. We approached the frosted glass doors of the boardroom. I paused for a second, feeling my heartbeat sync with the watch's tick. Then I pushed the door open. Silence hit like a slow-motion explosion. The boardroom had been buzzing, voices, soft laughter, someone flipping papers. But when the door clicked shut, Everything stopped, like a record scratching to a halt. Derek stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence, gesturing like he was giving a TED Talk. He saw me, his face shifting from surprise, to irritation to confusion. It was the look of a guy trying to figure out why the irrelevant guy from last week was invading his sacred space. "Ethan," he said, his voice a touch too high. "This meeting's for board members only." I smiled, polite, professional, but cold as steel. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, set my folder down, and sat. "Exactly," I said.
And I'm here as one.
Silence. A deafening silence, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Derek stared at the folder, then at me, then around the room, like he was waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a prank. No one did. "Ethan," he said again, his voice harder, like volume could overpower me. "As I said, employees aren't allowed in board-level meetings." I held his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not here as an employee," I said, letting the words hang for a beat. "I'm here as the majority shareholder." The room's temperature dropped 5 degrees. You could feel it. Everyone sat up straighter, even Henry Brooks, a grizzled board member with glasses from the Nixon era. He picked up the top document, frowning at the gold seal. "This is legit?" he asked. "Completely legit," I replied. "I inherited 90% of the company's shares through a family trust, activated on my 35th birthday. The documents are notarized, filed, and fully compliant with corporate governance." Derek stood there, his face blotching red like he'd been unplugged mid-sentence. He resorted to attack, as any cornered man with too much pride, and too little leverage would. "You're kidding, right?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is a personal vendetta, a cheap stunt. Why would your father—" I cut him off, my voice calm but razor sharp. "Because he trusted me. And because he knew what would happen without oversight. He knew what this company could become under someone like you." That landed. It rippled through the room, and I saw the board members' eyes shift. They knew what I meant, even if no one said it aloud. Derek had turned the company into a vanity project, a stage for his ego. I opened the second folder. "Now we're going to review the executive leadership, including the CEO position." Derek shot to his feet, nearly shouting, "This is a coup. You think you can just waltz in here?" "I'm not thinking," I interrupted, my voice just loud enough to silence the room. "I'm doing, and I have the authority." I slid a copy of the financial performance report down the table, then another, and kept going until every seat had one. "Let's talk results," I said. No need to raise my voice. Employee satisfaction is down 38%. Turnover in key departments is up 47%. There are 3 unresolved discrimination complaints. Sales are flat in a market where our competitors are growing. I scanned the room, watching the board members lean in, their faces growing tense. I flipped to the next section of the report. And that's just the start. Overspending on executive perks, unapproved travel compensation, bonuses for a select few, while the company was barred from hiring. All approved under your leadership, Derek. Derek didn't sit. He looked ready to flip the table. "You're twisting the numbers," he yelled. "You're rigging them for your petty revenge fantasy." I locked eyes with him. No blink, no smile. "I don't need to twist anything," I said. "I have proof. You thought no one with enough power would ever challenge you. Today, that assumption ends." I opened the final folder. "This is a formal motion to remove Derek Vaughn as CEO, effective upon completion of the necessary paperwork." The room froze. You could have heard a pen drop. The board secretary, a small man with round glasses, stared at me like I'd sprouted wings. "You don't need a second vote, do you?" he asked, half whispering. "I own 90%, I said. "It's not just a majority, it's math." Henry Brooks cleared his throat, sitting forward. "Per the company bylaws, with your vote, the motion's carried." Derek slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "This is impossible," he roared. I gave him one final look, calm, composed, the same way I'd looked at him when he fired. "It's already done," I said. No security was needed. He didn't fight, not really. But as he stormed out, I saw his shoulders slump, like the strength he'd flaunted had evaporated. His face twisted, no longer a leader's, just a small, defeated man's. The door clicked shut, and I turned back to the board. "This company deserves better," I said. "So do its people. Starting now, that's what they'll get." Henry Brooks nodded slowly, arms crossed. "Welcome back, Ethan." That was it. No confetti, no dramatic score, just a quiet shift of power, the way it was meant to be. The boardroom door closed behind Derek Vaughn, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I stood there, in the gleaming glass room on the 32nd floor, feeling the steady tick of the watch on my wrist. No fireworks, no roaring applause, just the eyes of the board members, shifting from shock to respect. Henry Brooks, the old-timer with the Nixon-era glasses, nodded slowly. "Welcome back, Ethan," he said, his voice low but firm. I nodded back, no smile. This wasn't the time to celebrate. Derek was gone, but the company, my father's legacy, was still teetering. Numbers don't lie, and they were telling a grim story. Employees disillusioned, departments in chaos, a culture warped by Derek's ego. I knew today's victory wasn't the end. It was just the first step. I didn't rush to move into the CEO's office. No grand announcement, no gold nameplate, or oversized screen flaunting achievements. Instead, I spent the next week walking the floors of the Loop high-rise. I moved through rows of cubicles, sat in break rooms, listened to stories Derek never bothered with. I talked to Ryan, the customer service guy who'd quietly led his team without recognition. I met Laura, a product developer who'd left 6 months ago after being passed over for a role Derek gave to a loudmouth with less skill. "We need you back," I told Laura at a small coffee shop in Wicker Park. "You deserve a shot to fix what they broke." She looked at me, eyes flickering with doubt. "You serious, Ethan?" "Damn straight, I'm serious," I replied, flashing a small smile. "Come back and do the work you love." She nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. Ryan got a shot too. I promoted him to head of customer experience, gave him a small office and a team to lead. "I don't need you shouting in meetings," I told him. "I need you doing what you've always done, keeping things running smooth." These changes weren't loud, but they echoed. I wasn't just fixing Derek's mistakes. I was rebuilding trust. I worked with Maggie Thornton, who'd provided the evidence to take Derek down, to overhaul HR policies. We dug through dusty folders, read every ignored complaint, met every employee who felt their voice had been silenced. A few mid-level managers, manipulators and bullies in suits, were fired without fanfare. They just vanished, like they'd never been there. I didn't want this company to be just a money machine. My father, James Caldwell, built it on values, hard work, honesty, respect for people. Derek had turned it into a stage for his ego, where only the loudest got noticed. I wanted to restore that, one step at a time. One afternoon, I stood in the main conference room, where Derek used to flaunt inflated sales projections. The whiteboard still bore traces of his meaningless charts. I called an all-hands meeting, not to pitch, but to listen. Employees filed in, hesitant, sticking to the back rows, like they were afraid of being called out. The air felt heavy, like the pause between thunderclaps. I stood at the front, no slides, no projector, just a black notebook in hand. "Some of you know me," I started, voice steady. "Some only know what you've heard. I'm not here to take over. I'm here to rebuild trust." A few heads lifted. No one spoke, but I felt the shift. "This company was built on your ideas," I went on. "Your late nights, your belief that what we were making mattered. Somewhere along the way, that got lost. I'm here to find it again." I paused, scanning the room. I saw familiar faces, engineers I'd grabbed lunch with, analysts whose proposals Derek never read, receptionists who never got a birthday email, but kept everything running. "I was told last week I wasn't a leader,"
On my way.
I said, voice soft but clear. They were partly right. I'm not here to clap for nonsense or kiss rings. I'm here to build something real. A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. I smiled. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about listening. And that's what I'm going to do. The meeting ended, but the story didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I walked every department, sat in break rooms, with the smell of burnt coffee, asked simple questions. What's wrong? What's missing? Who's really doing the work? I heard about buried projects, dismissed ideas, employees quietly holding things together. I started making moves. Ryan got the reins to lead new initiatives. Laura came back, bringing ideas. Derek had called pie in the sky. I revamped HR processes, ensuring every complaint got a fair look. I launched a program called People First, an idea from my father's old notebook, meant to reward creativity, promote fairness, and recognize the quiet work. One evening, I walked the 32 NB floor hallway, lights dim. This place used to feel cold, clinical, like success had a curfew and a dress code. Now, I heard laughter from a conference room, someone sharing memes on Slack in the kitchen. Desks had personality again, family photos, plants that weren't wilting, a sticky note on one that read, "Water me. I want to survive," like we all do. I stopped at a whiteboard in the engineering bullpen. In the corner, someone had written in blue marker, "He's back, and he's leading." 3 words, double underlined. I stared at it, feeling a warmth spread through me. No title, no press release mattered as much as that. I stepped into the CEO's office for the first time that weekend. Not because I needed to prove anything. I set the family photo on the desk's corner. My father and me, opening day, him laughing, me with cake on my face. I sat down, not with a sense of triumph, but of endurance. This wasn't a takeover. It was a homecoming. A year after Derek Vaughn fired me, I stood before the familiar glass doors of the company's building in Chicago's Loop. This time, I wasn't carrying a box of personal belongings or a polite smile to mask the sting. I wore a fitted navy suit, held a slim folder, and carried the weight of the company's future. The wind off the Chicago River blew past, carrying the scent of water and steel, reminding me of the days my father walked me along its banks, teaching me that patience was the greatest strength. I stepped into the lobby, nodding to Sarah, the receptionist. She stood, smiling. "Morning, Ethan," she said, no longer using my last name like before. "Hey, Sarah," I replied, offering a small smile. "How's today going?" "Like a damn good day," she answered, eyes sparkling. "Everyone's waiting for you upstairs." I nodded, stepping into the elevator. The building was the same, glass walls, marble floors, the hum of the coffee machine, but the air felt different. No more tense glances when an executive passed by. No more whispers behind backs. For the first time in years, this company felt alive. I walked through the 32 end-end floor hallway, once cold as a hospital. Now desks were alive with color. Family photos, plants, quirky sticky notes. A whiteboard in the engineering bullpen still held last week's message in blue marker. "He's back, and he's leading." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. This wasn't my victory, it was ours. The CEO's office was mine now, but I hadn't changed much. No gold nameplate, no giant screen flaunting stats. Just a tidy walnut desk, a few comfortable chairs, and photos on the walls, not of me, but of the people here. Product launches, office potlucks, small but meaningful moments. Behind my desk was a picture of my father, James Caldwell, standing outside our first office, not as a monument, but as a compass. The latest quarterly report had just come in, our strongest in 5 years. Revenue smashed records, customer satisfaction was up 23%, employee retention climbed 41%. But the numbers weren't what made me proud. It was how we got there. No coercion, no inflated figure, no late-night emails demanding people bleed for bonuses they'd never see. We did it fairly, transparently, honestly. I sat at my desk, brushing my thumb over the family photo in the corner. My father and me, opening day, him laughing, me with cake smeared on my face. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, like a heartbeat. I thought about my journey, from the moment to the day I stood in the boardroom, holding 90% of the share. But this wasn't a story about revenge. It was about restoring what was lost, not just for me, but for everyone who believed in this company. One morning, I called another all-hands meeting. Not to announce a win, but to share a vision. Employees filed into the main conference room, no longer hesitant. They took the front rows, chatting easily, like it was a family gathering. I stood before them, still just with my black notebook, no slides or big screen needed. "I want to thank you all," I started, voice low but clear. "Thank you for believing in a harder path, for not taking the easy way out, when just doing enough would have been simpler." A few heads nodded, a few smiled. I went on. "I was once told I wasn't a leader." Maybe they were right, in their way. Leadership isn't about giving orders or flying first class. It's about responsibility, about having the guts to say the right thing when it's tough. I glanced at the photo of my father on the wall, opening day with the red ribbon. My father built this company on those principles, and I'm proud to say we're living them again. No thunderous standing ovation, just a quiet, warm agreement, lingering longer than any sound. After the meeting, I walked through the departments. In marketing, an intern who'd just finished her first big campaign beamed with pride. In product, engineers cracked jokes, no longer drained or stressed, just alive. In the break room, someone brought cupcakes for the last day of an internship, and I sat down, listening to them chat about nothing important for 20 minutes. Leadership sometimes is presence, creating a place where people can be themselves without fear. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to give good people a chance to win, to make kindness not a weakness, to let a soft-spoken engineer still climb the ladder, to ensure customer service wasn't a dead end. I wanted a place where power came from respect, not fear. One evening, I walked along the Chicago River. city lights reflecting on the water. I held the family photo, feeling its weight. My father used to say, "The river will sort your thoughts." And he was right. This river, quiet but powerful, reminded me that justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be right. The company was a place for people now. Conversations didn't happen in hushed whispers over coffee. They happened openly, heard. Good people weren't just retained, they were given room to grow. We didn't hoard the mic. We passed it around, letting every voice find its place. My story began with an insult, outdated, and ended with a legacy restored. But this isn't just my story. It's Ryan's, Laura's, Sarah's, everyone's who believed we could be better. A year ago, Derek fired me, with a smug grin, and a speech about vision. Today we have vision, and it belongs to all of us. I stood by the Chicago River, watching the city lights, thinking of my father. He'd given me not just the company, but the responsibility to protect what he believed in. I brushed my thumb over the watch, feeling its steady pulse, and knew I'd made him proud. Not because I won, but because I did what was right. Thanks for sticking with this story, a tale of justice, patience, and restoring what's right. If you enjoyed my journey, from being called outdated to leading an entire company, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's next. We've got more stories coming, full of moments where justice gets served, quiet but powerful. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? Thanks, and see you in the next one.